ago. But most people call me Josh because I guess that people are that relaxed. I don't mind it. I've been called Josh my whole life, and like there's like a million people call me Josh, and like 10 call me Joshua, and so it's like but it's okay. Like I mean I will respond to Joshua too. Like my grandmother calls me Joshua, and it's like okay, yeah. She instilled in me when I was a kid, when you're professional, use your full name. I actually agreed with that. I think there's something I think this is my name. This is who I am. Let's just roll with it. So,
yeah. Well, as a fellow long name possessor, I have had many variations. I only hear Kristopher when I'm really in trouble or someone's trying to be polite. Most of the time, it's either Kris or sometimes Topher, Toph. It's even gotten as short as Toe. So it depends on
that's ugly. That one's just ugly. Like it's just like I would like Kris. I can definitely see, but Toe, that feels like lazy on a completely like.
To be honest with you, it was very close friends. So it just got very shorthand, very very shorthand.
It's either very intimate. It's like there had to be. It's either intimate or those people are just lazy as fuck. One or the other. It's like wow. You can't even now pronounce the K. You went with everything that was familiar. You were just too scared of the K, and I was like, wow, okay, sure. But no, like we were talking, like as I was telling him off the air, ladies and gentlemen, I was watching a little bit of First Things First, but prior to that, I was watching a Yu-Gi-Oh thing, a card game thing, and one of the things I've learned is every one of my guests is different. And so what I've become now, I have definitely interests. There are definitely interests in what I do. And I'd be lying to you if I said I would look at absolutely everything. But I have found that guests over the years have forced me to expand my thinking. And as a result, I constantly have to learn. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing the show is it never stops. Like okay, so I ended up with John. He's there's his adult books. It's like okay, this clicks to something I did way back in the day when I was interviewing romance authors. So I've interviewed romance authors. So it's not that different of the subject matter, and you learn as to truly do this, like truly do an interview well. You have to be willing to listen, but that also means you have to be kind of open-minded. So I never stop learning. It's just the way it goes.
Well, and I've been so impressed with your guest list lately. You've had the full gamut of writers and artists, and I mean from so many different voiceover artists, from so many different positions in the industry, and that's one of the things that draws me to your podcast so much is that you're constantly interviewing interesting people, most importantly. But I really respect the fact that you're challenging yourself with inviting not just a narrow window of creators, but like a broad spectrum of creators. And that, for me anyways, makes your show a lot more interesting and exciting to tune into.
Well, yeah, I don't. Well, also, if you look at my background, I do a lot of different creative things, right? I just do, and I keep pushing. I sold my second piece of art. I can't honestly believe I sold my second piece of art. I never would have imagined that in like a million years. Speaking of which, Tori, if you're listening or watching this, I'm going to get to you tomorrow. The weather was good today. It was just complete dog shit today. I decided I was not going to go outside. No, this wasn't a lockdown thing. This was like, oh, it's one of those. It's not even like a nice. It's like that wet snow.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you woke up, it's like, nah, I don't really feel it today.
Yeah.
But it was one of those situations where one of the things I really wanted to do with this show. I mean, if you even look at the level of fame of the guests I have, it's all over the map. People just getting started, people that have really made it, and everything in the middle. The idea, I think one of the biggest I don't say this out loud. I don't look at any guests. I look at you all the same in one way. You're human beings. You all have you've taken your life journey and done your different things. And as a result, like it's become a much more interesting, life. And it's amazing how similar everybody I deal with is. it's also amazing how different you all are too. It's like everybody goes through like the same, especially in the realm of art. I think we all go through that same baptism of fire of like what we are and what we do, and as a result, I want to quietly put that as a message of the show. Anybody can come on this show and be interesting. It doesn't matter who it is, where they are in their life. Does that make sense?
That's the really exciting thing about, first of all, being a creator, but then also looking at, I'll call it art. Sure. Everybody has their own background. Everybody comes with their own ideas. And yes, there's context to our ideas. And I think we all have our influences. And so we can look at, I'll use my book as an example, like it's heavily influenced by Kung Fu stuff. But what I did is I went in and said, I love all these elements of Kung Fu, but what am I bringing to the story that makes it a unique story and not just a rehash of what somebody else has done? And that's what's so exciting, right? Like, no matter how experienced you are, if you've spent any time trying to develop your art, whether it's writing or music or directing or martial arts, whatever, your history, your experience is going to influence the final product of that. It's going to influence the path that you take. And which means that no matter what you produce and how similar it is to somebody else's, there will always be something unique about it. There will always be something that's undoubtedly yours that nobody else would have come up with that combination of ideas.
It's not even so much the ideas. It's even it goes even beyond that. I actually completely agree with you. It's what I've had to challenge myself in the last year in a lot of different ways. And one of the things I had to look at is, okay, I'm about to release my third book. I've done 2 novels. They're digital. They're on Amazon right now. I've been keep promising myself that I would go wide and at some point I am this year going to go wide. But the thing about that is, I recognized something very early on. It doesn't matter how crazy the ideas are. Somebody else has thought of them in some form or fashion. What we truly bring as a creative is ourselves, like our own experiences in the world, as you say, shape us, makes us who we are. And what we're doing is we're a species, no matter what is going on, we are trying constantly to give each other messages. We're telling each other stories about how we see the world. And an artist is, I think, in some ways, the boldest version of a problem solver, because you're telling your story and now everybody can listen to it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it could be terrible, and it's terrifying because, oh my God, what if I suck?
Yeah, no.
Right, totally right. Flip side, what if I'm great? What if I'm amazing? What if this is something special? And actually, more often than not, I respect anybody that goes out there and does something. It doesn't matter what it is. I respect it. I recognize how much guts it actually takes to go from this magnificent imagination, ether, universal, cosmic conscious God, whatever you feel comfortable describing that as, and going from this, I'm going to make something.
Right.
Oh God, what am I doing? And the more often than not, I don't know about you, I have never figured out what the hell I'm doing on anything I've come up with.
It's so a little bit about my background is that up until a few years ago, the majority of my creative outlet was through music. And so I've been writing and performing and improvising and doing just about any genre of music you can think of. And a lot of what you just said really resonated with me, because it's like, as a musician, you create this emotion or this story through the music that you've composed, and you are not only recording that and putting that out there for people to listen to and react to, but you're standing on stage in front of a bunch of people who are giving you immediate feedback as to what they think of your creation. And it's pretty intense. Sometimes it's exhilarating. Other times you're like, should I be doing this? I'm not 100% sure.
Well, it's like it's the first time you kiss a girl. You don't know what you're doing. You just
Right.
know it's going to be pretty. You hope it's going to be pretty fun when it's over. Yeah, you hope. Eventually, you figure it out somewhere. Well, maybe I can't say that completely. I don't know. I've heard stories, and I kind of go, well, maybe people don't figure this. I don't judge. I don't care. I look at it kind of like it takes strength to be vulnerable, and art is this weird amount ballet or dance of I'm solving a problem. I'm conveying a story, whether that's doing commercial work, whether it's like let's say your music, like doing a jingle for an advertisement. That's still art. It's just you're serving a very specific purpose.
Right.
Or I'm telling a story that I want to tell because I feel deep down compelled to tell this story. And either way, there's a point of vulnerability that you have to kind of come to terms with, because you're not going to do your best work if you just keep it in your head.
Right.
There has to be something here that has to come out to the page. If it doesn't, you can still, I think, be good, but I don't think you're ever great.
Well, and I think that goes right with my philosophy of, you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to try stuff. You have to be willing to push yourself so that you can continue to grow as a creative person. If you are constantly doing the same thing over and over again, it may be successful and people may really enjoy it. But in the end, how are you ever going to know what you're fully capable of doing or what you're fully capable of presenting to the world if you don't every once in a while just go a little bit further or challenge yourself to try to do something different? And, failure is objective. You can say that it's a failure. You may not like what I produced, but maybe I learned something incredible from the experience that made me discover something later that ends up being, revolutionary. I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't taken that chance.
Everything leads to somewhere. If we're going to talk music, one of my favorite albums, believe it or not, it's Linkin Park's Thousand Suns. It's a concept album.
Right.
It's not their best album. I mean, objectively speaking, I can look at it and go, they did better work before and after this album. But it was such a chance. They said, you know what? Let's take a concept. Let's put it together. Let's make a whole bunch of songs and other material. Let's get a message out there with it. Mm-hmm. And they did it. I think it's an amazing, like from a single song perspective, that album's a lot weaker than, say, some of their other stuff. But from a concept, it's very consistent start to finish. And I imagine, especially with their later stuff, there was a maturity there because they went and did something off clip. Do you read like paperbacks or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the terrifying thing about being an author in a traditional market, this is the terrifying thing. What if you come like as a very, very poor joke, came up with like this mystic character you could not stand, and it sold like 1 million copies? Right? That's Arthur Conan Doyle. That was Arthur Conan Doyle's personal hell. Was Sherlock Holmes was a creation that did phenomenally well commercially. So as an artist, as a writer, now, if Conan Doyle had been alive, he would have said, I love The Lost World. I love The Lost World. I love everything else I did. But you fucking want this detective, you sons of bitches. Why? Why?
Right.
You want this detective? I cannot stand him. In fact, I cannot stand him so much. He was such just an interesting, like, one of or two of, that he was, as a concept, he was fascinating. But I didn't even have his own voice in any of these things because I couldn't stand the prick. And here you are laughing it up. And I have to keep writing it. And I tried to kill the son of a bitch. And you wouldn't let me. You brought him back. You made me bring him back. I hate you. I hate all of you.
Well, you think about the same thing with pop musicians, right? Like they write that huge hit that everybody wants to hear. And I always have to wonder when these bands from, you see a lot of these bands from the 90s that are touring again. And, they've got that one hit from the 90s that brought them so much attention. And then here they are, they're playing it all these years later. And you have to wonder, do they do it? Do they feel as inspired playing that, decades later, or are they like? And what do they have to do to feel inspired to play that over and over again?
I do think there is a little difference though, and here's the difference. This is the thing. Okay, decades have passed, and you've done other things. You've been able to do other things. I think with the song, it's a little bit more. It's easier because what you get, like, yeah, is it maybe your favorite thing in your arsenal? Probably not. Like, I mean, you've done everything you can do to this song. You've jazzed it up, you countryed it down, you metalized it. You did everything you possibly could think of to do to this song. But ultimately, but I think there comes a zen point with music in the sense that I think for a lot, especially guys that are just going back and having fun, because that's what you're doing. If you're in the '90s and you're touring right now, unless you're one of the really big bands, you're doing this for fun. You're not doing this because you're doing this because it seems like a fun ride. This is going to be a fun time, and you may or may not get this opportunity again because there's not quite the same. You get the thrill of the stage, and you did something that people really liked. I think at some point, yeah, topping it, I think that bothers you, especially when your career is really active. Eminem did this best when he did The Way I Am. He talked about, no, I'm not going to be able to top this others. I'm not going to be able to do it. Fuck you. And that was literally his whole thing. But he's still active in the business. He's still trying to top himself. When he gets to the point when he's going to go back and look at his career as more behind him than in front of him, and now he can just have fun, not have to worry about how the pressure of his albums just being such a pillar of the industry anymore. And you can just have fun. He might look back and come up with a very fun version of Stan to do on stage just because it amuses the shit out of him, right? Or he might come up with like he'll do his version of My Name Is, and he'll do it like that will be his closer every single freaking night because this is fun now. This isn't work. This is a joy. With writing, I think the thing about that is, okay, we can get caught. Peerless is your book, right? I'm sure you have a finite run, start to finish, plan with it, or maybe you're just going by the seat of your pants. I don't know. We'll get to that in a bit, right? But let me ask you this: let's say, and you never know because it could be one of those strange stars and line thing. You sell 1 million copies of that book, right? Now, besides the fact that you might literally go on the biggest like bender ever, because how the hell did you do that?
My tiki glass collection will get quite large.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, no, your house just becomes a giant tiki glass. That's it. It becomes a giant tiki glass.
Yeah.
But
all of a sudden, I'm spun.
I have that in my head. I can't unsee it now. I just can't unsee it. But you now there's a lot more pressure on your next book, especially that run. And the thing is, you're going to have even if there's you'd expect a drop off point a little bit after, like you're like, whoa, I'm never going to do this again. If it happens again, you're the next Harry Potter, and then it's like the biggest tiki glass in the world ever made will just be in your honor. But even with the drop down, you'll be able to make a sustained income doing this book forever. And I think as an artist, that's a really tempting thing. It's both it's a blessing and a curse. You have something people want to see from you, and that's what we all dream about. But you've got other stories you got to tell, but it pays the bills.
Right.
What do you do? Right.
Right. I mean, and there are so many creative ways that people have done that over the years. I think that if you have a winning story, a winning concept, and you are lucky enough that an audience has latched onto that, but you have other stories to tell, I think it can be limiting in that you have a responsibility. You've got a fan base. You don't want to completely throw off that fan base and have them be like, what the? But at the same time, if you are giving that fan base continual content that they're really excited about, what's to say you couldn't have this other thing over here that is
absolutely
completely different? And
and I think the cool thing about like the comic world, especially the fact that you're in a Kickstarter environment, you have that luxury. It's like, okay, I have to do this book now because it's successful, but now it's letting me try other things that I wouldn't have, and then, but even then, your moves will become a little bit more calculated too. Like maybe, okay, your book's kung fu, maybe your next book is a thriller, something that's not quite like it's different, but not that different. You might,
Hold on a second. Did you steal my journal? Because you're talking about my next idea. Let's
yeah,
talk
okay, yeah,
about it.
but it's business, right? I do
Right.
science fiction. I'm writing about killer cupcakes, so I have that like silly thing nailed down.
Mhm.
So I'm actually trying to I have a silly thing. In terms of music, I have my white key, killer cupcakes, my dark key, the lights going out for 30 days and doing a Fahrenheit 451 homage. And eventually, I'm going to like put the rest of the colors of my rainbow in the inside there, and so that people can see everything I can do. But that's a decision I've made as a creator, and for me, I recognize too that going this path, I may never see commercial success.
Right.
The flip side is, if I do see commercial success, I will probably be the first one there.
Mm-hmm.
Ergo, I will make stupid money, like fuck you money, because no one else is going to be able to. No one else will have thought of this.
Yeah.
That's the risk you take going my path. You're right. Yours is you got a hit or you got a really good book and it's doing well, but not well enough. You can kind of experiment. But let's say you're like Terry Brooks with Shanhara. He's always going to do Shanhara too. I think he enjoys it. I think and again, he's found his piece with that world, that concept, and he's found different ways to tell that story.
Yeah.
But he's always telling that story.
Yeah.
And I think the business end of things, just strictly the business end of things as being a creative, we have to be aware of whatever we put out there. We are telling those stories forever. That's what going back to something about being authentic with what you bring to the table.
Sure.
And that's why that's so important. Because if you don't, and you do happen to find your magic hit, you'll be Conan Doyle. You will hate yourself.
So let me ask you a question. So there is most definitely a methodology for writing stories that are accessible to audiences, right? Of course, there are always exceptions, and there are always people who will try something different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jack Kerouac sits down and does a stream of thought book and puts it out there, and it happens to latch on to a certain audience. And now we're still talking about, on the road. But if you look at, the majority of the stories in Hollywood and many of the stories that we read, there's a shape to them, and there are patterns within those books. But I feel like you can, within those structures, to make those stories accessible, have a lot of creative freedom.
Absolutely.
So I feel like even if Peerless is a big hit and people want more Peerless, if I present another story that has nothing to do with Peerless, my goal is still to tell a compelling story.
Absolutely.
And it might be a different audience, but what's wrong with that if the story is quality?
I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. I just think we're a business. It's kind of like that's the flip side of this. Like, we are a business. Whether this is like, I'm talking strictly a business and not a creative. A creative end, you can tell any story you want, and it doesn't really matter. Like, so I gotta ask this. Did you make an album for Peerless?
So that's a really great question. So Peerless came from music that I was writing. So there was demos that have been produced, and I've released some of those demos so people can hear them. The initial idea for it was that I wanted to write a comic book that had a soundtrack with it. And I know that people have attempted to do this before, where they write music that is part of the story, it appears in the story, and but what I was hoping to do was to make it more of an immersive experience, so the music actually directly tied into what was going on in the book, like if you were listening to a soundtrack to a television show or a movie or something like that. And then the ultimate goal, it's an 8-issue series, so the ultimate goal would be 2 songs per book at minimum. And then at the end of the 8-issue series, you have 16 tracks, and you have a complete album. if dreams come true and people latch onto this concept, I would love to put out a trade with all the issues collected, and then also put out a vinyl album of the music to accompany it, and that would be super exciting. That would
That'd
be
be amazing.
really
But
fun.
okay, so here's why I thoroughly enjoyed the concept. Hey, we've been shared. That's awesome. But here's the thing, right? I look at it like this in terms of just storytelling. Okay, comics and music work great together. I've seen many comic strip that uses song lyrics in the script, and it works masterfully because comics. The cool thing about comics, and this is the thing I love about them, is you imagine you imagine two very important things in comics. The first is the voice. You imagine much like a read. This is where comics and books are share the exact same thing. Is when I hear dialogue, I hear different voices when I read stuff. I just I have different I have a couple different voices in my head, and those are what I imagine when I read books. The second thing, though, and this is what is unique to comics, is you're imagining time. And I think I love how music has this really cool ability to convey time and just how the notes are played. Especially if you look at more classical music, it's really masterful at setting a scene, a setting, conveying a specific feeling, and telling a story about that feeling all the way through. And comics can do the same thing. So I feel like they're not that different, right? So I'd be very curious. See, what I'd be thinking about, like if I was to do a digital comic per se, as a unique way of doing it, I would try to figure out a way to incorporate sound into the comic if the soundtrack called for it, because that would be neat. That mixing of mediums right now is still being very much experimented with, but if any genre can do it, it's comics. I think comics are. I think that because comics is a result of a mixed medium of words and pictures. Now you're adding another dimension to it. You're adding words, pictures, and sound, and you can still convey the passage of time however you'd like. So, again, this is me putting on my mad scientist cap, going,
"Yep."
Right, but everything, because I'm illustrating my first book, right? In terms of my own next novel, I'm illustrating little pieces of it, and it occurs to me that everything I put on the page has to have a purpose. And comics are, like I said, comics are great because you use gutters, and your gutters are how you convey time. The images you show and what you don't show are literally a line on the page, and it's brilliant what comics can do. So when I think of like storytelling, you can tell I'm an experimenter. I love just trying different things out just to see what result I can create with the reader. But I think we lost track of the original point, but that's okay. But I think like what you're going for in terms of the scores, the soundtracks, I think you could. And I'm just surprised in one sense. What kind of music did you do? If you don't mind me asking.
Right. So, my primary instrument is trombone, and when growing up, I was introduced to jazz.
That's what I thought.
Relatively young age, and really latched onto it. It was something. It was kind of like my thing in high school, and I went on my undergrad. I did a lot of jazz stuff and graduated, and then moved back here to Cleveland and was working with a lot of musicians around town here. And one of the first groups I worked with after graduation was a group called the Aphrodisiatics. And what we did is we covered a lot of the funk and jazz songs that were used in early hip hop, as the DJs would use those records to create beats for MCs to rap on top of. And we would do covers of those funk and jazz songs, which was super fun and exposed me to a lot of music that I'd listened to but not really seriously considered. And that, of course, then led me to discovering Fred Wesley, who was the trombone player for James Brown's band and also for George Clinton's groups, and was basically like the constructor of funk horns, the funk horn sound in the throughout the 70s. And I was just, as a trombone player, I was like, here's this guy he's the band leader for James Brown. He comes into George Clinton's group. He creates this whole horn section sound. This guy is a fascinating person and an accomplished musician. And I just love his playing and his style of attack. And so I really dove into that. Well, that then led to experimenting and really getting into vintage music. And to this day, I really like music from the 60s and 70s, even earlier than that, 40s, 50s. There's something about the way that music was produced in those eras that it has faults. It's more analog. There's something that feels much more intimate to me about that music. And so anyways, for years I've been a sideman, and I've been writing music for bands that I've been in, and I've and doing arranging for other people. And I finally was like, I really need to write stuff for myself. So I just took all my instruments out. I have quite the collection here in the studio, and I just started playing, like just creating beats. I knew I wanted to do something that was kind of funky, kind of soul influenced. And so just sitting here at the computer, writing stuff, coming up with beats, coming up with chord changes and melodies. And I was like, there's something unifying all this music. It feels like it's music that's connected somehow. So I kept going, and all of a sudden I was like, this sounds like the soundtrack to a 1970s kung fu movie that just never got made. And I really feel like I need to flesh this out. I need to follow this because, one, I love this era of music. Two, I love 70s kung fu movies. So I was like, I need to keep going with this.
Who doesn't love 70s kung fu movies?
Well, I mean, that's true. So so I'm writing this music and I'm experimenting. I was like, I think there's a story here. So I had just finished this really cool event in Cleveland called the Lottery League. And what they do is they take musicians from all around Cleveland, and it's like a draft. So we're all in one room, and there are all these bands. Each band has a drummer, and then they just put everybody else's name in a bin. And the only guiding rule is you can't have ever worked with anybody else in your band. And they had come up with this great computer system to make sure that people didn't get put in bands with people they've worked with before. And so I was put in a band with a heavy metal drummer, a punk bass player and singer, and another trombone player from Brazil, and myself playing trombone and guzheng. So 2 trombones, punk bass player, and a metal drummer. And so we had 2 months to write 10 minutes of original music. And then at the end of the whole thing, they bring all the bands together, and it's like a whole day event, 3 stages. Every band plays a 10-minute set, and you get to present what you created over 2 months. So we met, and we found out that we had a mutual interest in really bad horror movies and kung fu movies. And we had a lot of fun drinking and talking about that stuff. And so I said, well, what if we did the soundtrack to like a kung fu movie? I could bring my guzheng out. We've got these trombones, so we could do kind of like the horn sound. And everybody was on board for that idea. So I came up with this idea of a Wing Chun master who fights the ruthless Tiger Clan, and we came up with this scroll that we read on stage. And this is all you find it on YouTube. I think I have it on my YouTube page, but
Awesome.
so anyways, I really had so much fun developing that idea. And so I was like, I think that's a good place to start. So then I watched tons of movies, and I read a bunch of books about Wing Chun, and I started doing the research, right? And then the story kind of started unfolding, and I was like, well, all right, this is 70s funk music. It's got a hip hop kind of element to it. Where in the country were those coming together? Well, the Bronx, of course, because it's the birth of hip hop. And all right, so we're in the Bronx, and what's kung fu doing in the Bronx? And So then I just started kind of putting the characters together, and then the music kind of amplified all of that. And before I knew it, I had a full story kind of mapped out, and kind of like this whole lineage of the Fists of Fate. And so to answer your earlier question, this may be 8 issues, but the 8-issue series ends on a note where I could continue on if people really like it. And then also we hint at a lot of backstory to this in this series. So again, if people like it, we have plenty of material to bring on both ends of this story, which would be really fun to explore. So I just kept building it from there, and I just developed this whole story out of the music that I was writing, which I feel like is a unique approach. Like the music informed the story. The music came before the story.
The feeling became before the story itself was formed, which is an interesting. And you had a clear idea what the feeling you were going for was.
Right.
Right, and that's a very interesting approach, because it's usually, for me, it's the opposite. I have the idea in my head, it's like, this is cool, and now I'm like, ah, crap, what am I supposed to feel here? Right? What am I trying to make you feel here? And everybody has their own answer to that question. But that's the challenge I have as a creator. But for you, it sounds like it's the opposite. You actually already know what the feelings of the story are going to be, and your job is to tell the best story you can to convey those feelings.
I had a couple great teachers. One was my high school creative writing teacher, and he always said, know what your premise is, know what the moral of the story is when you sit down to write your story. Because if you know what the moral is, you know what you're trying to convey to the readers, then that will inform what your characters do and the situations you put them in. At least gives you a framework to play in. And then I had one of the collaborators on the story, Nick. He was very adamant that, like, as we go into this, know what you want to convey to the audience. You know, our thing was Kiara, the main character, is coming back to the Bronx. She grew up there and had a very traumatizing experience before she left the city. So she's coming back to rescue her boyfriend, her lover, but she's doing so very reluctantly. I mean, she does not want to be back in the city. She thought she would never come back. Now she's back there. She's got to face her past while also facing her present. And so, you know, your past binds or braces you for the future. You know, like, either you learn from your past and you grow, or you're stuck with the person you think you were in the past, and you don't adapt. And so that was driving. I think another thing that really came through in the story that was important for us was the sense of community. You think about early hip hop, community based. You think about neighborhoods like the Bronx. There are pockets where people bond together. And then also, because this idea kind of came out of the Lottery League, which is all about community, it's no wonder that my brain kind of went that way as we weaved through the story. So yeah, I definitely feel like that was helpful to me in navigating what was going to happen in the development of these characters, knowing what I wanted to convey, what feelings I wanted, what I wanted the reader to get from the story.
Interesting. And it's also interesting, like your music background. So I always think the most creative, like, music. I'm a metal guy. I like metal, but I also like jazz too. I think jazz is fun because, again, they're both. I think the music background in both is very similar. Metal has a surprisingly classical bass.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it has a very surprisingly classical bass. And so does jazz. Both of that's where they both have in common. It's where, from that point, is where they divert. One almost plays with harmony, and the other one plays with discord. And it's a lot. It's almost like, can you go this way? I'll go that way. I'll see you when we go around the world. And that's what happens there, right? So, but it's you've been doing story structure for a long time.
Okay, so time to reveal the truth. I as a musician feel I'm a storyteller. So
Mhm.
as a musician, when I write a song, when I'm writing the lyrics, when I'm writing the music that goes along with that, I'm trying to convey an emotion or a concept to the audience, and the decisions I make between the lyrics and the music uh, go a long way in affecting the experience of the listener. Either they're on board and they're uplifted by that, or maybe they're confused. Like maybe I decide that the lyrics and the music are opposing forces, and I want you to kind of interpret like the lyrics are in general happy, but I'm using a lot of minor chords and a lot of dark instrumentation. Well, what am I trying to get the audience to do? Like you have to think about that stuff when you're composing.
You're telling a horror story, is what you're doing with the latter one.
There you go.
Yeah,
There you
right.
go.
Yeah,
So you're thinking about some. So I've been thinking about those things. I also am a huge fan of soundtrack music and just blown away by how good a storyteller John Williams is, how amazing a storyteller Danny Elfman is. I mean, really, any of these big composers. Imagine. I don't know if you've ever hit the mute button on a movie and watched it, and how the absence of music affects your experience watching the film.
I've actually helped make movies. Like I've been part of film crews in the past, so you don't realize like the layer. Like this is actually why I'm almost shocked you haven't, like this is the idea I had earlier about music inside your comic. I'm almost surprised you haven't done it. Although I imagine you're going to be a great comic writer because you understand. And upon talking to you, I'm just going to say it's guys like you, Jamie McKelvey. It's a wonder there isn't more musicians in comics, to be perfectly honest, because you guys are playing almost with the exact same beats.
Mm-hmm.
It's just instead of lyrics and notes, it's lyrics and pictures, which is not that different. It's interesting, actually. You actually gave me an idea for a comic, believe it or not.
Right at time, man.
Yeah, but what I was gonna say, like you've been telling stories for a long time, and it seems to me like um, yeah, it's like you have a pretty good foundation with what you're doing, and it sounds, yeah, like this is something like everything you've done has led to this. All right, it's kind of
I
like
agree with you.
it seems to me like the storytelling beats you learn in music are serving you incredibly well in comics because you have, partly because it's a different discipline, and that does actually surprisingly help. Different languages help add to the language you're trying to tell your story in, but also it like I said, like you almost like all the tools comics require, pictures, understanding the story, the like you have some huge advantages before you even started. It sounds
Well,
like.
I yes and no. The story to me was the easy part. Executing the story was really hard. So this is I'm glad that we're talking about this because I was really hoping that this would be a place our conversation would go to tonight because I I I want what is so exciting for me about talking to you about Peerless and being a part of 101 Tales and having opportunities to talk to people about my story is that 3 years ago I had an idea for a story, but had never written a comic book before, had never written a creative story before. And when I decided that I thought this idea was strong, I thought the project was important, I needed to see it through, then it was like, it's time to do the work. And so I went out and I bought 20 books on writing and writing comics and character development and story arcs and things like that. And then this coincides with the birth of my youngest child. So I was like out on the porch early in the morning, like reading and taking notes and trying to figure this stuff out while she's still sleeping. She's taking naps in the afternoon. I'm getting the books out and writing stuff down. And I got to the point where I had a script done. And I was like, okay, cool. I feel pretty good about this. I need somebody to tear it apart. So I hired Nick. He came in as an editor and just ripped it apart and said, this is good, this is bad, whatever. And then I continued to grow from there. And then I had to learn how to talk to artists. So I had to learn how to talk to Pablo about, what we create in the script and what he's drawing. And then I had to learn how to talk to Will about colors. I'd never talked to an artist in that context before. I'd never talked to a colorist in that context before. And these guys were incredible in that they were not only enthusiastic about the material, but they were willing to work with me. I think they understood that I was very excited about the story, very committed to making a great story. And so even though I was learning, I was very open to them in their input and working with them directly. So the point I want to make is that if you as a creative person, this is to anybody who's listening, come up with an idea, if you feel very passionate about it and you feel like you have to see it through, do the work. Mm-hmm. There's nothing holding you back. Just the resources are out there. The people are out there. There's a community that I'm discovering right now of people who like, Joshua, you've gone through this path too. You've written stories and figured it out and put it out there, figured out how to get it on Amazon, figured out how to,
Mm-hmm.
the business. Like, it's possible. You just have to say, this story or this concept is important enough that I'm going to do the work and see it through. And I'm telling you, the first moment that this book came in the mail and I held it in my hands after 3 years of working on it, I was like, first of all, I can't even believe this is real. Like, this is tactile. I'm like holding it. But at the same time, I'm like, shit, I did it. Like 3 years of work and learning and collaborating. And here it is. And it gave me such a sense of like, there are no limitations to what I can create. There are no limitations to what I can do.
I actually, the cool thing about doing stuff is it opens doors for you to do more stuff. And it makes you rethink how to do stuff. Like, I'm working on, like I said, I started illustrating 2 months ago, right? I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm learning.
Right.
I'm learning. And my goal at the end of this year, I was going to do it started sooner. I mentioned it on a podcast. I want to get it rolling, but I've been drawing, and it's like I haven't worked on the craft end of it a little bit. I want to do a comic about a dragon that makes fun of his creator for drawing him poorly and everything else around it.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah, right. So I know exactly what the actual story is, and I think it's a good story for anyone trying to get into art or creating anything, because it's basically about facing your fears as an artist. So that's the moral of the story, the real moral of the story. Everything else I'm just going to have fun with. Also, the things I'm going to try to make myself draw. It's going to be like, terrible things I'm going to do.
Do you find this, though, like once you open yourself up to another form of creativity, I mean, I've always found that makes me expand like my brain starts thinking about things in different ways. And so I come up with more original ideas and more interesting ideas.
So it makes me relook at the techniques I've used prior to. Like, okay, so novel one, novel two. I'm going to tell you like one of the big differences. Drawing, not drawing. One of them is how it colors how I just do description. Mm-hmm. I recognize something too. Now that I've kind of like put pictures in my head, I expanded how I'm doing it. And I'm also using a lot more art style stuff like sketching, staining. Like there's definitely something about how that works. I think more in terms of even things like piano, in terms of simplified shapes to describe larger, more complex pictures. So that's something I learned really quickly. The other thing it did too is it made me look at, okay, pictures are best when they're actions of some kind. Like you can have a moment of stillness, but even in that stillness, there's a story being told. Well, it made me relook at my novel and go, okay, so everything in my story now has to tell a story in of itself. Otherwise, it's not going to be as good as it could be.
Right.
So it almost made me go look at my work and also try to get rid of some crutches. I don't use he said, she said. I don't use he asked, she asked. None of that's there.
Right.
I made a conscious. if it's there, it's on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a crutch anymore. If it's there, there's a reason for it. If it's not there, it's because there are better ways to tell that story. Right. And that's what this has forced me to do. It has forced me, and every time, it's not just this, like the podcast, like podcasts with dialogue.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. I look at dialogue so differently now because I talk to so many people. I understand the I'm gonna call it the Brian Bendis trap of where you just put so much dialogue in on it. Yeah, right. I get it. Like I really get how that can happen simply because dialogue, if you just let it go. Now I let that go, but in my prose, I let it go. Right. Because it feels more natural.
Well, that's right for the medium.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Comics, you want. I'm gonna follow this rule to the day I die. No more than 2 bubbles for dialogue on a character. Period. Because one, my words serve a story. When I write a comic book, and you know this too, most of the words I write will never see the page. It's not for me. It's for whoever's doing the heavy lifting. So if that's the case, then my words now are the counterpoint to what's on the page. They're either in harmony with it, which I think every comic book creator should start that way. Mm-hmm. Right? And then as you get good at it, then play with the discord. That smile, and then you're using darker shades. Like, you know what? When I'm smart enough to figure out that little nuance of emotion, then I'll play with it. But first, I'm going to work with harmony because I'm not going to fight with what's already there.
Yeah.
Right? I'm smart enough that way. Right? That's how I think. I'm smart enough to go with the flow. If I'm going to change the flow, I got to figure out what the hell I'm doing first.
And I think it's interesting as you're talking about this. I'm thinking to myself, as I got further into the series and I was working on writing more dialogue, because Nick was very adamant, like, you've got to be concise. You can't use too many words. And I was like, oh my God, this is like songwriting. It's like writing lyrics. Like my typical lyrics for a song are like the first version is so different from the final version because I start first step, get all out, just write it down on the paper. And then you have to start cutting and slashing and thinking about rhythm and thinking about time and thinking how it's going to line up with the melody. And so you have to be very concise with your language. And you have to think very concisely about like, okay, well, what's the message I'm trying to deliver, and how do I do that in the words that are going to fit within this phrase or within this melody?
And more importantly, what's the story you're telling? What's the story you're really? What are we trying to tell here?
Right.
And this, and again, younger me did not know this. Older me figured this out, but younger me did not know this. But everything's about that. It's like if you look at it from the point of view of, okay, I have a killer cupcake that wants to eat people like Pac-Man. Why does this killer cupcake exist? And what is the point of the killer cupcake in the story besides personal amusement? Yeah, you're right. Because even if I'm going to amuse myself writing a story, because I am built that way. I got to do it in a way that makes sense for the reader to come along for the ride. Right. Otherwise, I mean, you can, like, here's the cool thing, about doing fiction, and it's true with music too. You can get anybody to buy in. It don't matter what the song's about. You can get people to buy it. Provided you don't fuck with expectations too hard.
Your audience. Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Right? Yeah, that's it. Provided you don't, you can take twist and turns along the way to get to that expectation. You can do that. In fact, it's encouraged. But you better not screw it up.
Right.
Or then it's like, you know what? That cupcake thing? Fuck you. That was dumb.
Forget you and your cupcake story. I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's right. see, I can make fun of myself. See,
Yep.
I can't make. I'm not gonna make fun of you because you're my guest. I don't know you that
I
well
appreciate
yet.
that.
I don't know you that well yet. I mean, maybe come back another couple times. I'll pick on you. Just ask Joe. Joe
Looking
Conklin
forward
or
to
something. Yeah, yeah.
it.
But number two, I know how I work my stories. I don't know like how. Although from what it sounds like, to me, like I said, you're tailor made for comics. Like honestly, and you get it. Like you get most of the important things. And again, now that upon talking to you, I'm actually really shocked there isn't more musicians getting into it because it's it's your wheelhouse. Like there isn't really much that. I mean, maybe you can't draw pictures. I don't know. Can you draw pictures?
My mom would tell you that I can draw, but I can draw pictures for my kids. But as far as drawing stuff for a comic book, I'm gonna leave that to the professionals. I think that down the line there may come a story in which I can illustrate it. I think it will probably be a story for little children because I think they'll be the audience that'll be most entertained by my drawing skills. Um, no, you know what? I thought about it because as you talk about more musicians writing comics, the first thought that comes to mind is like it's expensive. I mean, I spent a lot of money making this book because I wanted to make a really good book, and I believe as a professional musician, like you bring somebody on to do your project, you better pay them, and sometimes that's monetary, sometimes that's well, you work on my project, I'll work on your project kind of thing, but.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally.
but I think that the cost is it is I mean it's nice that Kickstarter exists and Indiegogo exists and that there are audiences there, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that there were a lot of people that backed our project. I mean, I feel we had like 260 people back our project. It's a first.
I'm gonna give you the Demolition Man high five. Yoing, yoing, yoing,
I
yoing,
feel like
yoing.
as a first time creator, that's a
No,
successful
that's
Kickstarter.
very good. No, it's definitely a step in the right direction. And you will find as you do more projects, you're going to get more notoriety. I noticed this when I did it last year. I released my first book. It did okay, but my second book also bolstered my first, and my third book is going to bolster my next two. And I already know this. And when I start doing sequels to my series,
Yeah.
that's when I'm going to really starting to see some dope. Like it's a journey. Like I think the unfortunate thing about arts today, I'm like, is actually it's true. You know, with sports, it's a journey to get to the point where there's purely pay dirt in it, and you've got to be committed to it. Like you've got to be a businessman or a woman
Right.
about it. There's no two ways. Like you recognize what you are.
Right.
Having said all that, that doesn't mean that like this will open doors for you regardless, like no matter how many issues of this you do, you've done a unique, one of a kind, cool project that you're always going to be proud of, and people will see that, and it will lead you to somewhere else as amazing and incredible no matter what happens. Something you said earlier about failure, there's only really one way to fail, and that's to quit.
Right.
Say it. Every other way, I mean, you get your app. Look, man, we've all fallen down. We've all fallen off the bicycle. We've all slipped and fell onto things we probably shouldn't have when we were kids. Lego blocks are the bane of all of our existence. Sorry, in that regard. But when you go through life, I mean, it's the result right then, the battle right then. You don't win every battle. In fact, you probably lose more than you win. It's the point that you just get up and keep swinging.
I did in 2003. No, let's go 2013. I did 2 Nightmare Before Christmas concerts. So in 2003, for the 10th anniversary, I put together a relatively small chamber ensemble, and we did very loose arrangements of the vocal music from the movie. In 2013, I decided for the 20th anniversary, I really wanted to step it up, and so I hired almost 30 musicians for that production. It was basically a chamber orchestra. I booked the venue. I got the copyright approval to write the arrangements, and did a crowdfunding for that, to a Kickstarter for that. And That event was a huge learning experience for me. I lost money on it, but I learned so much from the process of putting it together and doing the arrangements and hiring the musicians and doing the Kickstarter. I wouldn't have been as prepared to do the Kickstarter for Peerless had I not done the Kickstarter for the Nightmare Before Christmas concert. So you're totally right. If you look at the event, it went well. The music went across really well. I got a lot of great positive feedback from folks. The audience attendance was pretty good, but I lost money. Some people could look at that and say, "Well, you failed. You didn't make your money back." I choose to look at it as I learned so much from doing that project that has had a positive effect on everything I've done since then, that it's anything but a failure. It's been a complete success. And I agree with you. Peerless it's an 8-issue series. I've got a lot of work to do. We're working on issue 2 right now. We're getting ready for the next crowdfunding campaign. There's a lot of work to be done to put the whole series together. However, I learned so much from the last experience. It's already paying dividends as we move forward in the series. And then on top of that, I mentioned earlier, when you venture into a new creative outlet, it affects your creativity. I've got a notebook now full of stories ready to be told. I got hired recently to write music for a short animation film. Super excited about that. And even talking to the director and creator of that, it was interesting how all the study I did on story structure and all the work I did to put my story together completely changed the way I approached talking to the director about their project and how they envisioned what they were trying to present, and then how the music plays into that. I'm super excited about this project. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Actually,
you can always learn, no matter if you take on the challenge of doing something and you see it through to the end, regardless of if you make money on it or not, you learn something from it, and if you stick with it, it snowballs. I'm very, very much believe that if you just gotta stick with it, you have to keep working.
Yep.
You keep learning, you keep getting better.
Yeah, I mean, you evolved. So, okay, 2 fun questions, and then we're gonna get to something I think kind of meaty here. Favorite soundtrack?
I have a lot that I really enjoy, but the Batman Returns soundtrack, for 2 reasons. One, Danny Elfman is awesome, and I think that the themes he wrote for each one of those characters, and if you were to turn that soundtrack on, it tells a story all by itself. You hear the Catwoman theme come in, and the Batman theme come in, and the Penguin and the circus, and he weaves them all together in such interesting ways. It's so great. It's such a great soundtrack. But the second level of that is that soundtrack was one of the first I had on cassette tape, and I will always remember walking home from school with my headphones on, listening to Batman Returns. Snow's coming down. I'm holding my trombone case. It's freezing cold, I'm by myself and I'm listening to this music in this snow world, and my imagination was allowed to run, and I was fully immersed in it. And that was one of the early experiences of music, just taking me somewhere, just taking me and letting my imagination wander. And I will always be indebted to that soundtrack for providing that very early opportunity to explore like that.
So from a childhood standpoint, it's Disney's Tarzan soundtrack. So there's 2 reasons for that. One, when I was in high school, it's the end of my high school career, and it was one of the, so we did the bus trip from Toronto, Ontario to Vancouver, British Columbia. So that's a long trip. It's a cool trip, right? But except for Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's kind of how long I have to get there. But that's another story for another day. But during that whole soundtrack, that whole trip, that was the soundtrack I listened to, and it's actually a good set. It's a pretty good score on the inside of the movie too. It's not quite as colorful as Batman Returns, but yeah, so that's like the personal sentimental one. For the other one, for me, believe it or not, is Rocky, the horns. Just
great soundtrack.
Yeah, no, that would, and like apparently like one of the best like crews to ever put together. Like that whole movie is almost like a magic moment in of
Yep.
itself.
Yep.
And completely. But that horn, dun 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 dun, dun, I mean, it's iconic, but also it's just so the skill it took to play that is incredible, and it goes to show you that where a music can take. Talking about something said earlier about music taking a movie to another level.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably one of the best examples of that. I think. Period.
God, Bill Conti wrote that, and he
Yeah.
did such an amazing job with one of my favorite cues is the early morning run cue, and it's just what he did musically to create that sense of like, you know, I'm beaten down and I'm all by myself and I'm in, you know, Philadelphia, and then he starts building it up as Rocky kind of like starts gaining more. It's so smart. It's he's so smart, and the decisions that he made on that soundtrack. I mean, not only did he write one of the most recognizable themes in all of Hollywood, but just the way he created moods in that movie is so
Oh
smart.
yeah, especially that movie. Although I will say I did Rocky 4 is a guilty pleasure for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
It's secretly a musical. Like Rocky 4 is actually secretly a musical. I'm not joking, right?
Now I got to go back and listen to it because I
But
don't know
no,
what you're
because
talking about.
seriously, if you look at if you look at the training montages, if you figure out the training montages, you look at the one like truly artistic part was when him and Drago were going at it in the boxing fight because it was really a war of wills, and the song War, that felt like it was just a clash of two guys that just they both wanted to win. They get like, and then my favorite scene in that whole movie is they're both in the corner. They've been both beat to shit. They look at each other between rounds, nod like respect. They get up and they just go right back at each other
Yep.
again, right? And the music told that story perfectly. But that one in particular, I'm not saying it's a great movie. It really isn't. The robot, I mean, I still don't know to this day. But if you look at it strictly, it's secretly a musical. I don't think people realize that. Like that movie, I'm not talking 3 or 2 or 1. One is beautiful. Rocky Balboa is, I think, a little underrated. Rocky 5 sucks. It just does. Four is
Living in America. I can never forget that.
no, that was amazing. It was a perfect swan song for Apollo. It was actually the perfect swan song
Yep.
for that character. And then but all if you listen to it, it's a musical. It actually secretly is. It's like wow. But I mean, Stallone is a big fan of the arts as well. So it doesn't shock me that he just would pull different like influences from all of those places. So so fun. Here's the other fun one. So I really enjoyed The Greatest Showman. One of the reasons I enjoyed The Greatest Showman, and then the same reason I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy, is that the music was secretly a character in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It secretly was. Do you like that kind of storytelling where the music is actually a character, even though it may not be as it's like almost like the invisible friend inside the movie?
Yes, I love the simple answer to that is yes. Guardians of the Galaxy is a wonderful example of how the music simultaneously set up a fun feel for the film, but gave us so much background information on Star-Lord and his family and his relationship with his mom. It delivered so much information without having to come out and say it, which is incredibly smart use of pop songs. And I'd say that they even had their moments in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I love the scene where Kurt Russell's talking about the song. It's at the very beginning when they're in the convertible and he's explaining about it, but then it comes back. It's reprieved later on in the movie, and I thought that was really well done. There are a couple films where I love how the music directly plays a role like that. The first one that comes to mind is the movie Amelie. And what's so great about that movie is that Jan Tiersen, and I know I just butchered his name, but he was a French street musician that the director had just happened to hear playing, and he's like, this movie takes place in Paris. I want it to have a Parisian feel. That's the guy. That's the sound that I want. And so when you watch that movie, he could have done strings and he could have done a big orchestral. It's a beautiful film. An orchestra would have worked really well with that. But instead, he decided to use music that really represented Paris and sounded like Paris. And I feel like it amplified the fact that the setting of that story and amplified the characters in a really well way. I also think that Wes Anderson's very good at picking soundtracks and matching them up with his films. Sometimes it can be really surprising, but I think Life Aquatic and all the David Bowie music, whether it's the actual David Bowie music or the Brazilian covers of David Bowie music, is super entertaining and really smart.
If you're gonna riff somebody, I mean, Bowie is pretty good choice. I mean, he was an amazing performer all the way around. Yeah. My personal favorite thing was when he was in the movie Labyrinth. He was such a good villain, but he did absolutely nothing in the movie.
I know. He was basically like, I'm just gonna stand here with a baby.
That's right. That's it. No, but that's all you need to do. It's like he had such a presence about him that you knew he was ominous, although secretly you knew that everybody was having fun with that movie, right? But he was so ominous. He didn't actually have to do very much, which goes to show you that sometimes less really is more.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've done a little bit of this. I've done a little bit of this with a couple other when I interviewed Chuck. What do you listen to when you write? Because I cannot imagine you not listening to music and writing.
Okay, well, with Peerless, I definitely listened to, and actually created a playlist. If you go to the Peerless Facebook group page, you can actually find the playlist of songs that influence Peerless. And I will say two things. When I have a concept, I like to deep dive into music and listen to it constantly. I have it on in the car. I have it on in the office. When it comes to the actual act of writing, music can be very distracting from me because I can be like, "Ooh, that chord change is pretty cool. Oh man, that bass line is tough."
Yeah.
And so then it distracts me from writing. So when I'm writing, I like to listen to amorphous music. So Brian Eno, his music for airports. I like to listen to Baroque music's pretty great at a very low level.
Interesting, Baroque. Okay.
Stuff that is not going to, it's not going to be too distracting. I learned from a very early age, though, that if I don't have any kind of sound going on, my brain wanders. So for me, having music on kind of helps me focus on the task at hand.
All right. So for me, because I like music and stuff. So, for me right now, it's not that one. I got a few goodies here I listen to. Big fan of her. Lights.
Oh, I'm not familiar. Sweet.
She does a very ethereal sound. Also, it's done a good comic called Skin and Earth, which actually was really, really fun.
Sweet.
Yeah, let's see. I'm a big fan of Miss Taria. I don't know if you're into metal at all, but if you are, she's really, really fun. And everybody watching, yes, I know these are CDs. I'm old.
Way to bring out the obsolete media.
Yeah. Listen, I love obsolete. Actually, truthfully, I love CDs now because now that they are obsolete, they're actually fun. Yeah. When they were actually in their apex, they suck balls because I would pay $20, $25 for one fucking song, like just one. I love the fact that when you look at an album now, there's a lot more work into the album itself, creating an experience. If they had done that when it was the big thing, CDs would still be the medium today, or at least one of the mediums today. Because that's vinyl. The thing about vinyl.
That's why vinyl's coming back. I'm glad you went there. That's why it's coming back. It's tactile and it's got an experience.
Yeah, no, it's also because the albums. I mean, look. I love those old Beatles albums. They look so bombastic and over the top and weird and wacky and one, but they add to what the music. They give you a sense of what the music's going to be like when you listen to it, and it's true. Like great albums covers, CDs went away from that. That's literally what happened with CDs. The CDs went away from that experience. We're just going to give you this compact, processed, manufactured, blah blah. No one, and eventually everybody was like, "Well, fuck you," right? And because also again for the price reasons, but also because now one of the things you could do with good old and another obsolete media, ladies and gentlemen, tapes, good old tapes.
Right.
You could make your own mixtapes and soundtracks, and you could create those cool things, and that was discouraged with CDs.
Mm-hmm.
Vinyls, it's vinyls are unique in that you don't want to record stuff on vinyls exactly, but they bring such a unique presentation experience and thing. It's almost like you could not with the CD make it feel like it was anything special, right? Whereas a vinyl just feels like a work of art. I think that's the big difference. One is completely manufactured, and the other is almost like a hand. Like when I look at like an actual vinyl record, it looks something like something handmade. I don't know if it was by maybe the original ones were. I am not versed in music history at all, but it feels that presence, that prestige. That's why vinyls are coming back. We don't pay for packaging. We pay for the experience we get when we do stuff. That's the truth, and that's why like movie up until the pandemic this year, movie theaters still existed. It's been an obsolete medium for decades, but there's nothing like going to the theater, and like so that was why they were slowly pricing themselves out into oblivion. Rent costs were probably a big part of that too, to be perfectly honest. But when you get right down to it, like theaters lasted a lot longer than they should have, because I can go sit in a big chair, get this giant thing of popcorn I'm paying stupid amounts of money doing, and I'm watching this thing. I got these sound speakers like blowing my brains out while I'm watching this epic movie, and I'm watching like Luke Skywalker fight Darth Vader, or I'm watching Rocky fight Apollo Creed, or I'm watching Mr. Miyagi teach Daniel wax on, wax off, right? And yes, guys, I am purposely dating myself. I'm old. Shut up. That's going to be like.
I'm with you, man. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So it's but that's the thing. Like that's why I think that's the thing. Like vinyl is such a unique presentation. That
it provides another challenge though too. Vinyl and cassette tapes, for that matter. First of all, you only have so much space.
Mm-hmm.
What happened with CDs is you had so much more room, and I feel like a lot of musicians were like little kids in a candy store, and they were like, "Oh my god, we could do 2 hours of music on one disc." And with a record and with a tape, you have to flip it, right? And so I think that there's a lot more thought into. All right, well, we've got this much space on side one. How are we going to start it? How are we going to end it? What's the connective material in between? Can we create a nice pause in the middle that makes people want to flip over the record to the second side, and then experience the second, and then do the same thing again, get to the end of that record, and then want to flip it over and play it all over again? There's a lot of psychology that goes into that, and it's like we were talking about earlier, like when you set up limitations for yourself or structure for yourself to work in, you have to then start being creative within those limitations, within that structure. And I think a lot of great art came as a result of that.
Absolutely. No. So I guess we're going to the last part of this, and this last part of this conversation. I've enjoyed this, by the way. Thanks for coming.
Me too.
Sure.
Yeah.
But here's this. Okay, so I got this little book. I don't have it with me here because it's in a storage locker right now in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm currently in Windsor, Ontario. So I don't have teleportation yet. One day, maybe one day.
Yes.
But the thing about that was there's this book. It's all about it was written by a guy that did commercial billboards from New York, and he used it to convey life lessons on top of artistic challenges. And one of the things I've learned and I've come to respect, the last thing I've noticed is um, the whole limitation thing. I've noticed this first. I had a buddy I work with and collaborate with. You give him a blank page, he's unless he's just having fun. Come up, create something for me that's going to make money. But you go to him like this. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm looking for this particular thing. It can't go above and beyond this, but it needs this. Make something for me.
Yeah.
He's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. The limitations and it gives him the structure he needs to create these pieces that work. And I find I think the last thing I find really interesting is looking back and going forward. I look at the fact that in some ways we've come to the point of no limits. Mediums are mixing. I'm broadcasting. I'm doing audio. We're having a conversation that we could literally go another hour, probably easy if we really wanted to. But the thing is, there's no structure now. All right, the structures are becoming different and more redefined, and they're a lot more limitless. So here's my question: in terms of comics, in terms of art, where do you see things going in terms of that medium?
All right. Well, I think off the top of my head, I think I have two avenues to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that lately it seems like in the industry there's a lot of upheaval and a lot of uncertainty about what the bigs are planning on doing and how that's going to affect things moving forward. And a lot of independent creators are thinking we are about to enter the golden age of independent comics, in which we have the means, the audience, and the ability to put any story out there that we want and connect with the audiences to do that. And we're not limited by the large corporations saying, well, we're only going to fund you if you bring in this amount of sales. And if you don't, then we're going to abandon your ideas altogether. And, so then how many times have you started a series and you're like, oh my God, the series is awesome. But it's a small audience. And so the big goes, we're not really going to continue that series. I'm a huge Swamp Thing fan. I want more Swamp Thing stories, and we're just not getting those right now because I think the Swamp Thing audience is limited, and that the DC is probably thinking, well, we can make more money, or we're choosing our battles, and so we're not going to produce as much of that. So I think that the potential for independent comics to be big, for people to find their audiences is very high, and for a lot of exciting work to be produced is. It's we as independent comic book creators really need to be adamant that we got to get our stories out there, but we also have to make sure that we are putting our absolute best foot forward when we put those stories out, so that those audiences can connect with our work and be excited about where we're going. The second part is I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking to a medium, and the medium was saying, with the shutdown, I think the wheels have been set in motion in which entertainment is going to be drastically different. Like, I don't see the medium saying this. I don't see movie theaters coming back in the same way. There may be specialty movie theaters where they're selling a certain experience, but certainly not like what we're used to, where you go to an AMC, sit down in the theater, watch a movie, and then leave. She kept saying that she envisioned pods of entertainment. So you have, and that those pods aren't limited to one genre. So it could be like what we've been talking about tonight. Like, maybe there's a pod of an audience specifically for comics that have music, and we now have the technology available to us to kind of present that. I think we're putting ourselves in a place where entertainment can become a lot more specialized, and we have more ways to connect with audiences, and to find, because I believe there's an audience for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we have the technology to connect with those audiences, then what's stopping each creator from putting their concept out there, putting in the work to find that audience, and then creating that pod in which they can be creative? I think I agree with her that I feel like the bigs are kind of crumbling, or they're starting to reconfigure themselves because they know that it's coming?
So I have two minds, two responses. I think this is what I think is the future of movie theaters. I think right now there is a big market for drive-in theaters, and if someone could actually,
So I love
no,
it.
no, no, I know, but no, like hear yourself. Like, honestly, hear yourself out with what you're actually saying. It's like I hope so. People want to go out. People still want to go out and do things, and again, on a personal note, I think the pandemic comes to an end this year in terms of the lockdown aspect of it.
Yeah,
If for no other reason, I think because we cannot be cooped up for another full year. I do not see that happening. Now, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. But I just know that we have come to this point where it's like, I want to go back out in the world. I want to go out to restaurants. I want to meet people. I want to go to bars. I want to go to concerts. I want to just experience things again. And I think and I think that there is a time limit on the allowance of trying to find a new and different way of doing it before we go back. That at least some of those things are going to come back just like they were before. Others are going to go, I think, completely change. I think the drive-in theater right now is a golden opportunity for a lot of enterprises. You don't need a lot of land. You just need a screen, right? And you just charge people to show up and watch the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
People would go for that, I think, in a heartbeat. Like, let's listen to yourself. Like when you said that, I hope so. There's a market for that, I think, right now. And anyone that's enterprising can do. I do agree with you. I think the movie theater as we know it is by and large done. I think there's going to be a few exceptions to that. Special theaters, maybe like the small independent theaters. Mm-hmm. I think those things actually have a legitimate shot of staying around. But the big giant like theaters you have the big comfy chairs, and they like that is probably has run its course, at least for a good long while, right? I
think the big what's the huge screens with the amazing sound system? Omnimax?
Yeah.
I think there will always be a market for that. I'll be honest with you. Like, there are films I seek out specifically to go have that experience.
Absolutely. Like that's my point. Like right. that desire for that experience, if anything, might have increased as a result. I mean, no, like, do you really want to look at your computer screen all the time? Right. I think that we've all kind of come to that point. It's like, no, fuck that shit. Right. Right. It's so I kind of see it. I kind of see like there are, I think some older things are going to come back. And I think like vinyl came back. Right. The fact that podcasting, if you sit there and think about it, is the old school drama radios. That's what these are, mm-hmm. Right? Old ideas get recycled and fit in new eras in different ways, and I think that's about to happen too. And I think that's one. Two. I think the challenge. This is the thing I've noticed when I've interviewed a lot of different creators. Actually, it depends on the communities. The video game community, for example, is very open to help. Everybody's helping each other. I love the video game community for that reason. It's phenomenal. The comic book community is somewhere between, it's about 50-50 that. I feel with the comic community, there is a little bit of, I'll help you, but I hope you don't, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I always get the feeling in the comic book industry that there's a lot more competition, or that feeling of competition inside it. Right or wrong, that's what I feel about it. That's how I kind of feel it feels like sometimes. The book community is interesting in the sense that I deal with a lot of authors that don't want to talk about their work. Mm. Right? Now, I know, fairness to them, this is me, I don't talk about my work a lot necessarily, but at the same time, I'm on every day. Like I'm always marketing myself on some level every day. So I kind of feel like I don't have to talk about my work all the time. People want to find me, they can find me. Right. Every episode description has links to all my stuff. So if you want to support me. If you don't, you won't. And that's just the way it is. Now, maybe I should be a little more vocal about that sometimes, but it is what it is. What I've learned about so I've noticed that even in comics, there's a whole bunch of artists or creators that don't want to talk to people. They want, like, the marketing aspect of it is daunting and intimidating.
Yeah.
But the reality of the situation is it's marketing storytelling.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely right.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Marketing, that's all marketing is. It's not, yes, seek audiences out. Okay, I'm running a Ready Player. I wrote Ready Player One meets Indiana Jones. So I gotta find Indiana Jones fans. I gotta find Ready Player One, Sword Art Online, that kind of stuff. I gotta find those fans because those fans I feel will dig they'll dig that work. I wrote an Alice in Wonderland riff, so you know what? I gotta find Alice in Wonderland fans. Right. They'll enjoy that stuff. But the thing is, right? I recognize the fact that in this time, in this place, in this moment, that the majority of the creatives, even I interview on here, don't have the confidence to go out there and say, hey, my work is great. So I think the challenge, I think we all have to become a little bit more like a professional wrestler. Let me tell you something, brother. My work, brother.
You.
Yeah. I love the Macho Man. Upon the older I get, the more I appreciate the Macho Man.
Yeah.
The Macho Man was amazing.
Agreed.
Yeah. Right. But the thing about that was, right, that's what we have to become. I think going forward, I do think the big, especially in entertainment, I think everybody's got a shot to work for any of the big companies. I think it's actually fair. I also think, though, for the majority of us, there's a shelf life of working with those big companies.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to seize the opportunities that are there for what they are. You might get, like, okay, seriously, I could see you do Doctor Strange. I think you have the ability to do I think because of your
that'd be fun.
Yeah, I think you would do an amazing Doctor Strange. Just based on what you talk about, bringing kung fu culture. I just imagine your Wong or your Iron Fist, or I could just imagine what you'd come up, and it would be amazing and wonderful. And maybe, just maybe, you stick around for the whole entire time. But what's more likely to happen is you're going to tell your story for those companies, and you're going to have a great time, and they're going to have a great time. But eventually, you're going to have to move on and go back to creating your own stuff all over again. So while you're in these positions, and this is what I will tell every creator, the two things that I'm going to wrap up, and then maybe have them respond, and we'll do all the plugging stuff.
Yeah.
Is the first and foremost is you busted your ass on your work. All of you. I don't care if you wrote, draw, composed. I don't care what you did. You put the time and effort it took to make this stuff. If you're listening to me right now, or you're like watching me right now, remember that. It's worth something. And it's not just like a little thing, it's a big thing. It's worth going out and putting it out there. Because if you didn't think that, you wouldn't have made it, first and foremost. Second, marketing is part of the business. You can't duck it.
Right.
If and when, it's going to be what opens doors for you to work with other people, number one. Number two, always recognize that your situation is always going to change. No matter how high you rise, your time will come and your time will go. While you're there, utilize the opportunities and the doors that you have out there to go into different and more wonderful places. So when it's over, your name is you're in a better space than when you walked in.
And I would add to that, when you're at that peak that you were talking about, when you're at that high level, take the time to connect with your audience and build meaningful relationships with them, because they will carry you for a long time after you're done working with the bigs. And there are examples of that in every industry, right? Like, think about Prince, for example, right? He he was huge, Warner Bros. And then they had the whole contract thing and the whole, artist previously known as. Prince produced so many self-released albums over his career, and when he, towards the end of his life, started coming back again, like his audience stuck with him the whole time, and he constantly had that audience that loved the music he made and would buy his stuff and back him up, which gave him the opportunity to do a lot of music that he really enjoyed. There are I really feel like building your audience and maintaining that connection with them is so vitally important, because it truly is. Look at what it did for. I'm going to come up with the cheesiest example I can. Wayne Newton, right?
Mhm.
Like, he goes to Vegas, he's still got old ladies like throwing their underwear at him because of what they remember about the height of his popularity and like the status he was and the feeling that they got from following his music, and he was able to continue to maintain that. I mean, connecting with your audience is so important. It is a part of marketing, and it's not just marketing your product and marketing yourself. It's saying, I'm a fan of Kung Fu, and if you're a fan of Kung Fu too, let's go have some fun together. I'm going to write some stories, but I want to talk to you about it, and I want to interact with you about it, and because I love Kung Fu as much as you love Kung Fu. And if you build those connections and you make those connections with people, then not only are you going to have a lot of fun because you're meeting your people, but you're also they're going to trust you. They're going to see you're enthusiastic. They're going to enjoy your story, and they're going to want more from you. And that's so important, being able to maintain.
Which goes back to authenticity and passion, which I think is a good way to actually get to the point where we wrap this bad boy up. No, dude, I enjoyed this. This was fun. I have to say, I was genuinely flattered at the enthusiasm of you pushing the show. It's strange for me because I just interview people, right? So it's just like, wow, he really wants to be on the show. This is cool. So thanks very much for your enthusiasm and for being on the show, man.
Well, and I want to tell you the reason why. When we were advertising for 101 Tales, we did something with Meredith. It was for she was doing like a horror week of stories and stuff. You and I were on one of those panels, and you may not remember, but you made a comment that was very encouraging. You were very like, you've got these creative ideas, and then I started following you, and you're always putting in inspirational posts on your page and stuff, and I appreciate that so much. As the teacher in me, and I've been a teacher now since 2004, so for quite a while, and it's so important for me that we as creators aren't here just to be like promoting our own material, but to be saying, you can do it too. I'm proof that you can create your dreams and you can do, your creations, and they can get out there. And so when you said that comment to me, and when I saw your post, I was like, I want to be a part of that guy's world. Because and then I started watching your podcast, and you're the same way with everybody, man. You're always talking about positive stuff and promoting people, and you're so curious, and I respect that so much.
Well, thank you. That you might make me blush. That's actually kind of cool. All right, so you got a Kickstarter coming up, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. So the first issue of Peerless was released in December. We had a successful Kickstarter campaign in the summer and the fall. And so this is issue 1 of an 8-issue series. Issue number 2 is in production right now. So we have artists drawing the pages. The whole 8-issue series is written. So it's just a matter of having the funds to pay the artists to produce it, because nobody wants to read a story with my drawings in it. It would be embarrassing for everybody. So we are aiming for a crowdfunding campaign in March for Peerless. Right now, I just want people to check out the first issue, see what it's all about. If you like 70s Bruce Lee, Shaw Brothers Kung Fu films, The Warriors, Big Trouble in Little China, those are our big influences on the story, and I think at least the feedback I'm getting for folks who've read it are saying we've done a good job of capturing that vintage feel and hitting all those notes. Blaxploitation films, the Pam Grier films, Kiara is strongly influenced by her, and so I encourage you to check out skinnykmusic.com. And there's a page on there dedicated completely to Peerless. If you want more information about that, of course, you can purchase a copy of the comic book there. If you're looking for it on Amazon, it is available on Amazon. Not a lot of purchases on Amazon so far, so you might have to dig a little bit, but it is there, I promise. And as always, I'm always looking for positive reviews on Amazon and positive reviews on social media. Look for us on Facebook. There's a Peerless page on Facebook, and then also my personal page too. So check it out.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this and another episode of Just Josh. And tomorrow morning, Miranda Crux that joins the podcast, and I'll have time for that later. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so a couple different ways. You can subscribe to it. I'm on YouTube as Josh Pantelresco. My Twitch channel is Just Joshing Podcast, twitch.tv/. You definitely check me out there. I just redid my Patreon. So patreon.com/Just Joshing Podcast. I've got some pretty cool little tiers, including a tier where I actually will teach people how to actually do this whole wonderful podcasting thing. I also will do drawings and writings and all kinds of other wonderful fun stuff. So if you want to support me there, that's a good way to do it. Buy my books on Amazon. The links will be in the description below. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Wait right there, buddy. I still got something that I need to ask you. There we go. All right, guys. Take care of yourselves, all right?